Welcome back. Thank you to everybody out there who's been watching on our YouTube and WNSTV Facebook Live channel. All of it brought to you by our friends at Cole Roofing. I'm usually drinking out of my mug from Billy Cole with my Royal Farms coffee and the Kona blend in here. Certainly this week, it's going to be very caffeinated around here, as I think it's going to be a wild and woolly week. Luke Jones, I would say, would be out in Owings Mills, but there's one stop to clean the lockers out on Monday morning. And Luke, you've been at this a decade. I've been at this 23 years, and you've been there for many of the Orioles' locker room cleanouts. They get out of here like poop through a goose. Most of these guys by sunset on Monday are gone somewhere to somewhere else to sort of decompress, because it all does happen kind of quickly. I mean, I had buses pointed to New England. We had flights pointed to Kansas City if necessary over the weekend. And you and I are headed to Atlanta in a couple of weeks. We'll be down there broadcasting live from Radio Row, as we always are, all week long. But the end happens quickly, but this is going to be a different kind of ending because of Flacco and because of Harbaugh and because of the dangling part of this, not to mention all of these veteran guys on big contracts, whether it's Yondo or Suggs or Weddle or any of the veteran players around here. This team's going to change more than most teams change because, quite frankly, they're losing their Super Bowl MVP quarterback.
Yeah, I mean, when you have a change at quarterback, and let's face it, I mean, the Lamar Jackson era began in Week 11. As I said at that point, it was either the beginning then or it was the soft opening, and it ended up being the beginning. So that's always going to headline whenever you have a transition, you know, whenever you're talking about players moving on, even coaches. I mean, there are so many quarterbacks in the history of this league who obviously had a star that was brighter than their head coach. So we'll see what happens with John Harbaugh in terms of an extension, in terms of whether he truly is remaining in Baltimore for the long haul or whether he winds up elsewhere. But
what's your predictor on this? How much money would you be willing to wager left or right on this issue? I am not sold. I sit 5 feet in front of John Harbaugh. He has done nothing on a physical level to communicate to me that he's sticking around, and I don't think the team's put the contract in front of him and it's not signed. This is, you know, Billick always says, time for pay, time for play, right? This is the time for pay right here, right now. It's not going to take long, right? The next 24, 48 hours, John Harbaugh's either going to be here for the long term or not, because if it's not, now's the time to go. And I would not, I said, if you gave me a 20, yeah, maybe $20 I'd say that he's sticking around. If you start talking 50s and 100s and certainly more than that, I would not wager anything significant that John Harbaugh is the long-term coach of this team until I see it. I'm from Missouri when it comes to that, or Dundalk in this case.
And that's fair. I mean, because of the history of this franchise, I mean, you go back to 2006, 2007. I mean, the Ravens in 2006 were coming off of a couple non-playoffs, or I guess two straight non-playoff seasons in 04 and 05, and that was famously when Steve Bisciotti kind of dressed down Brian Billick publicly, and they had the great 13-3 season in 06. He gets the extension. Everything seems hunky-dory. You know, they have Steve McNair at that point. They finally had at least some semblance of stability, or at least the appearance of stability at the quarterback position. And then 2007 happened, and it was over very quickly for Brian Billick and for other individuals. But I think beyond the financial part of this, beyond the part of this as far as how much John Harbaugh truly in his heart of hearts wants to be here, there's still the question of what happened on Sunday and how that relates to Marty Morningwig, the coaching staff, the rest of the players. You know, there are a lot of moving parts here, and I think if you're Steve Bisciotti and you watch what happened to that offense, and look, I'm not going to sugarcoat this. You know very well, and I've written about it, I'm not a big Marty Morningwig fan. I like Marty personally. I don't think the body of work adds up to the amount of faith that he's commanded. You know, I don't think it really justifies the faith that John Harbaugh has.
I don't think there's anything about him that we say, oh, my God, we're lucky to have him. He's the best offensive coordinator in the league. I'm not seeing that through 2 quarterbacks and, 6 running backs and 15 wide receivers and 15 offensive linemen. I would agree with you on that. I mean, I don't think it's the biggest loss in the world. I think there was something about Marty and Flacco having some simpatico, or the the appearance of that, that even that goes away when you draft Lamar Jackson and bring in Urban. The whole thing's been a little messy for me, and I don't know that Steve Bisciotti doesn't look at this and say, we've made the playoffs twice in 6 years. We've not won a playoff game since 2014. It's 2019. We have a different quarterback. We'd probably like to bring in some different coaches. I don't know. I mean, I really would think that this could be a devastating week in Owings Mills, and I could be wrong about that, but if I were betting in one direction or another, some major things are going to be happening around here, and I think fans should be on their toes this week. That's what I think.
Yeah, I mean, I still would lean toward Harbaugh returning, but I'm not.
Well, it's been an organization all about stability, so if you're going to bet on anything, bet on Ozzie and John Harbaugh because they've survived everything, right? I mean,
right.
And Eric DeCosta is going to be the successor, and that's the way this has been laid out because that's the way Steve likes things.
Sure. But going back to Marty for a second, and this really is just the entire coaching staff and tying it to Lamar Jackson's development. If you're Steve Bisciotti, if you're Eric DeCosta, and you watch Sunday, and look, the Ravens won 6 out of 7. They had this running game that was able to be so productive. They were able to control the time of possession. They were having an impact then on the defense staying fresh. And I still think some of that was inflated, quite frankly, as far as the impact. I think a lot of it was the defense was healthier than it was before the bye and playing really well. And give Wink Martindale credit. And I think it was complimentary, but I don't think the defense suddenly became so much greater just because the offense was running the football. I think there were multiple reasons there. But if you're Bisciotti, if you're Eric DeCosta, you've seen what's happened over the final 7 weeks, then you get into the postseason, going up against, acknowledging the Chargers had a pretty good defense, and look at it statistically, they weren't a slouch defensively, so let's keep that in mind. But you get into the position for the first time where the running game is completely shut down. And even if they should have used more heavy packages, whatever, it didn't happen. So you've seen what Lamar Jackson had done over the final 7 weeks, and he's finally put in a position where he's forced to throw more, or at least in game situations that dictated throwing more. And I'm not talking about the final 8 minutes of the game. I'm talking about the first 52. From the point that they fell behind 2 possessions, and they clearly weren't running the ball well, it dictated what? In a vacuum. Oh, you got to start throwing it more then. And very clearly, he wasn't up to that challenge on Sunday. How much of that do you say is a reflection on him? And Nestor, how much of that is a reflection on who's developing him that at the very end of his rookie season, so it's really not a rookie anymore when you're into your 17th game, and in fairness, 8th game as a starter, so I do need to acknowledge that. But
part of this is the whole system, right? To say that Lamar Jackson can't beat you throwing the football down 23-3. That would say that the offensive line has to protect him long enough that he doesn't take off and run. And I still said, and Luke, you and I watch the game together, and we don't communicate much because you're really into the game, and we're into our own little worlds, and we're tweeting and looking at substitutions and sort of speaking in tongues. Sometimes we have half fragments. We're almost like an old married couple when it comes to that. But there were times I was elbowing you and saying, dude, their best play is fake the pass and have Lamar take off and run like hell.
Yeah.
That's their best play. That's when they're down by 10 points, 12 points, whatever it was at halftime, I'm like, just take off and run. Just play high school football for the next 30 minutes because you have no prayer of fading back to pass, because if you could fade back to pass and be protected properly, they'd put number 5 in because he actually reads defenses and throws the ball into a Dixie cup most of the time. And I laugh. I cry. I cringe when I see people say, oh, Flacco didn't throw the ball all that well. I'm like, dude, were your eyes open the last 12 years? They're never going to have a quarterback that's more accurate than Joe Flacco that throws the ball better than him. Now, protecting him, decisions, mobility, 34 years old and half broken down. I'll hear all of those arguments, but don't come after me with Joe Flacco didn't throw the ball well. They're not going to have a quarterback here this side of Peyton Manning who throws the ball better than Joe Flacco. So
early in his career, yeah, his accuracy wasn't as good the last couple of years. It just wasn't, and there's lots of data that supports that. But your point is well taken, And I want to go back to the point I was trying to finish. If you're Steve Bisciotti and Eric DaCosta and you get into the situation where the running game is not working and logic says that you need to throw the ball more, and one, they still weren't really trying to throw the ball that much more until they were down 20 points at the very end of the game. And two, when they did, Lamar Jackson looked completely out of his element. Does that change how you view this offensive coaching staff, and do you start to wonder, is this kid really as far along in his development as we thought he might have been? Or were we just kind of using this run-heavy offense because that's all he can do? And if it's the latter, are you as confident that this is the right offensive coaching staff to be developing him, not just for right now, but for next year, the year after that?
Look, I'd love to sit here 4 years from now, whoever's coaching the team, and Lamar Jackson is a guy that every January 1 we look at and say, this kid can go win 10, 11, 12 games next year just because he throws the ball. He's improving. He's throwing the ball. He's got to have to throw the ball at some point, right? Like, he's just going to have to throw the ball. And I don't know that any of us that have witnessed what we've seen so far would really say, yeah, if we had the 5th pick in the draft next year, I'd take this kid all over again, or I would go take some Josh Darnold or the kid that throws the ball around for Georgia who I've seen lately, or whomever the next guy is, to say, we have to have a traditional offense. This is cute. It's fun. It was a little bit of a thrill. We went on a little magic carpet ride here and played a home playoff game. But can you win a Super Bowl like this? I'm going to stand here right now and say the same thing I would have said yesterday, tomorrow, last week. Until I see it, you can't have a quarterback running around 12 to 15 times a game who isn't all that good of a throwing pocket quarterback, and you don't have a system designed to protect him to be that guy. And you don't have the wide receivers either. So on top of all of that, you've taken all the things that you didn't have for Joe Flacco and said, well, here, the one thing you have that Joe doesn't have is wheels, so take off. And then you put him in the game and he doesn't take off. So in a playoff game, I stand as very frustrated here this week, Luke, with this, because I don't know. The strategy changed so much, and it sort of snaked and meandered. And now that the season's over, I still don't really know what the strategy is, because I'm not even sure what they're doing with their coach yet, right?
Yeah, and I mean, those questions are going to remain. I mean, when you have that kind of performance in the final game of the season, in the same way that we talked about last year with 4th and 12 and the fallout from that. Now, they won the division. They hosted a playoff game. They finished 10-6, which was a game better than they did the year before, and 2 games better than the year before that. So there was improvement in terms of wins and losses and the end outcome, but when you have that much of a thud, that much of a dud at the end of the season, and you play that at home, you play that way at home, it is going to force everyone to think about that, and it is going to be a long off season. And I think, for Lamar Jackson's sake, I was kind of glad to see him have some success at the very end of the game, so he wasn't in a position where he was having historically poor, final game totals. I mean, he had 3 completions through 3 quarters. But you look at that, and it does cause you to have doubts and to really wonder. And I don't know. I still think anyone who's going to sit here and try to say that Lamar Jackson doesn't have it or is a bust, I mean, that's asinine to say something, to suggest that. And I'm not saying you're saying that. There are very fair reasons to have doubts, but he needs to improve.
The fair reasons I need to have doubts, he doesn't take care of the football, and that leads to them being down by 10 points, and then he can't get them out of the hole, and the team's not built to get him out of the hole. If you're going to take the leap of faith that he's going to become a pocket-passing quarterback with effectiveness, if he can do that, then he can be one of the all-time greats. But there still is this thing of him leading with his head 12 to 15 times a game, and a half a season in, I haven't seen any hook slide in him. I haven't seen him run to daylight as much as I have seen him try to run people over. And, I think he plays a reckless style of football that allows you to live on the edge, and I think we squeezed a lot of joy and fun out of that. But I think the downside of that is you're losing by 12 points, and it feels like you're down 4 touchdowns, not 4 field goals. Yeah. And I don't know how you live like that in this league or in this division, quite frankly.
I hear you, but tell me what comeback victories Joe Flacco had led over the last 2 or 3 years. I mean, it's a bad position to be in. It really is, but there aren't many quarterbacks that bring you back. And look, could they have brought in Joe Flacco on Sunday? Yeah, sure, they could have. I don't know if it would have really resulted in anything different. I think Flacco probably would have done what Lamar Jackson ended up doing in the fourth quarter when the Chargers kind of went into prevent and got sleepy with their defense. But all these big picture questions are going to need to be answered. And the reality is that you have to take a leap of faith because they drafted this guy and they're getting rid of Joe Flacco. And, oh, by the way, they hadn't made the playoffs with Joe Flacco the last few years either. So I'll go back to, and I will continue to say this, and I'm going to be a broken record until I see a difference because this is an organizational failure. Joe Flacco is going out the door right now because this organization failed just as much, and in my opinion, more than his individual play failed. And believe me, he didn't play well the last few years. That's part of it. He has to own that. There's no doubt. There's no question about that. But I need to see this organization learn from its mistakes of the last 5 to 6 years and invest in its offense and not draft 3 defensive players or 4 defensive players with their first 3 or 4 day 1 and day 2 picks year after year. We saw the start of that this year in the process of drafting Flacco's replacement, but I don't want to see this team going back to defense, and then you're shopping at the nickel and dime for offensive line and skill position players for your quarterback. And we've just seen that way too much over the last 5 or 6 years. And then you throw in some bad luck with no one being able to foresee what happened with Ray Rice. And initially, the initial hip injury to Dennis Pitta, even though they still gave him a big contract after that, which I had questions about at the time, and that didn't turn out. And Eugene Monroe didn't work out. But
the Matt Elam and the Brashad Perryman, you know what I mean, like that.
Yeah, there were lots of failed draft picks. I mean, it's one thing to talk. It's one thing to talk about drafting defense. Their defense still didn't end up being all that it should have been cracked up to be until this year. So, did you really get the return on the investment in that way? So, long story short, no question, Lamar Jackson needs to develop, and there are question marks there, and there's going to be some doubts there to go along with plenty to like about him. And I want to be very clear, and I've said this before, I do think he has arm talent. We see some throws where you say, wow, that was really impressive, but can they refine his mechanics? Can he develop enough consistency for that arm talent to come out more often than it doesn't? And he's not at that point right now. And the question is going to be, does he get to that point? But, they're at the point of no return. I mean, and that's why I kind of understood and even kind of agreed with not going to Joe Flacco, because when they decided in Week 15, when Flacco was healthy enough to play again, that Lamar Jackson was going to be their starter, there was no going back at that point because you've told Joe, we're done with you. And let's face it, the Ravens told Joe Flacco, even though they weren't divorced yet at that point, they told him back in April, we're pretty much done with you, or we're planning to be done with you sooner rather than later. And they very abruptly, matter-of-factly told him in Week 15 when he was healthy enough to play, we're sticking with Lamar Jackson, which I agreed with that decision at the time based on how the team was playing and how they were complementing, each phase was complementing itself. But when you make that decision, you need to have the conviction to stick with it, and I think the message long-term, and I get it, you're trying to win a playoff game, but you're down 3 scores. Joe Flacco wasn't going to bring them back and win that. There was no evidence to suggest that was going to happen from recent history, and given how the offensive line was playing, and given the fact that he hadn't played in over 2 months, maybe you improve your win probability at that point from 3% to 5%, but then what does that do long-term when you just told your quarterback of what was supposed to be the present and certainly the future, at least the next year or two, that, yeah, you're our guy, but we didn't have enough faith in you now, and we're going to bench you for the guy that we're sending off the boat in three months anyway. That message wouldn't have been good to Lamar Jackson, and frankly, I'm not sure that message would have been well received by the rest of the locker room based on comments we heard in support of Lamar Jackson after the game. And I think that's something, as much as everyone talks about being in the moment in the playoffs, and I get that, but It's a very real, big picture aspect that still is there, that's still a reality when you're talking about the quarterback more than any other position. And
well, it's fascinating from our fan base, right? Let's go through this for 23 years because you've been on the boat from the beginning. We haven't had many quarterback controversies around here. You know, the Dilfer Banks thing happened, and there was no controversy. You won the Super Bowl. You know, there's no saying who made the right decision or the wrong decision. And I'll chat with Coach Billig about that a little later on in the week as well. But this part of booing the starter and rooting for the backup and the romanticism linked to Joe Flacco that I have, that you have, that anybody that witnessed the parade here 7 years ago has, that there was a moment of this Johnny U thing that he could come in and throw the ball around. That is romanticism. That's not the reality. And hey, no bigger Joe guy than me, right? I am an official, not unofficial, an official apologist for Flacco. But Lamar led them back into the game in a way at the end of the game that there's no arguing that they should have put Joe in or shouldn't have put Joe in or what that would have represented. But the question now is, what do you do with Lamar moving forward? What do you do with the coaches moving forward? What do you do with the offense moving forward? Because Sunday wasn't good enough for either one of these quarterbacks.
Sure, but Lamar's their guy. I mean, they're not drafting another quarterback in the first round, nor should they. I mean, you made your decision. If you had the conviction to trade up and take him 32nd overall, he's their guy. And John Harbaugh made it very clear, Lamar Jackson's their quarterback. And that was another thing. I thought it was odd. And I can't look. We all know Joe Flacco's gone after this year. That's been clear for a while now. But for John Harbaugh to go out of his way to talk so much in the past tense about Joe Flacco, it seemed kind of odd to me for a guy that you're supposedly going to try to trade. To me, that doesn't do anything to help your trade value for him. I just thought that was a little unusual. Not being over the top and critical in that, but. I mean, Lamar Jackson's going to have to be their guy for the next year and 2 years probably, and you see how he improves. And most quarterbacks do improve. Some improve more than others. That doesn't mean he's going to improve enough to think that he's going to be your guy for the next 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 years like Joe Flacco ended up being.
I just think there's so many things to work on for him, and that's probably from the coaching standpoint what they love, because he has wheels you can't teach. He has arm strength you can't teach. Now, accuracy, decision-making, reading defenses,
sure.
All of that can be worked on over the next 9 months while he's not getting mauled by 315-pound linemen landing on him or, 265-pound linebackers diving at him. The next 9 months, he gets to get healthy and work on the brain part of the game, and also knowing there is no Joe Flacco looking over his shoulder. It's his job, and whomever his wide receivers are going to be, all the criticism of Flacco not throwing to those guys in April and May and June, he's going to have the ability to do all of that with whomever the coach is, with whomever the coordinator is going to be, and whomever the quarterback coach is going to be. I'm not absolutely convinced it's John Harbaugh and Marty Morningwig and Urban right now. I'm not convinced of that. I think this week is going to tell a lot about the future of the Ravens.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say. And even if John Harbaugh signs an extension, does he make changes to his coaching staff? I mean, I've already made clear my feelings on Marty Morningwig. I think Greg Roman's done a fantastic job the last couple of years with the run game. I mean, look what happened last year. They ran the ball very well, and they needed to when Joe Flacco's back was not 100% the first half of the season, and he really, really struggled. The running game was what kind of kept them afloat. It wasn't great, but it was good enough. And I mean, I'll still question what the heck happened to it the first half of the season. I mean, as much as we've talked about Lamar Jackson's impact on the running game, to me it's a concern, and it's an indictment on both the coaching staff and the front office for putting a roster together that you needed to have Lamar Jackson in the football game in order to run the football. You can't run the football with a standard pocket passer in there. That was a big problem in the first half of the season, and that's one where that's not Joe Flacco. It's not Joe Flacco's fault they couldn't run the football. It's the fault of how this roster was put together and whatever they were doing at that point from a coaching standpoint. However you want to kind of split those two parts of the pie up, but I mean, it really does become now how much development does Lamar Jackson make? And again, I'll go back to what I said a few minutes ago. if you're Steve Bisciotti sitting here and Jackson's put in the first position that he's needed to pass the ball more because they haven't been able to run it at will against a team, and he wasn't even close to being up to the task. That doesn't, for me, that doesn't mean you question Lamar Jackson as much as you question where is his development as far as that part of his game. And I think it's fair to ask that, and it's fair to wonder, and it's fair to have doubts. And other than Greg Roman, I can't vouch too heavily for the rest of the coaches involved there. I know James Urban is very well regarded. I know Joe Flacco started off playing really well in the month of September, but then that kind of went away, and some old Flacco habits started to creep their head in October, and then he got hurt. And with Lamar Jackson, did he get better from spring OTAs till now? Yeah, sure, but did he get, was there enough development? And I'll even go back to the morning of the Steelers game, Nestor, the day that Joe Flacco got hurt. Remember, that was the Ian Rappaport report that morning that the Ravens were in a position where if things really went south with John Harbaugh, it wasn't completely dismissed that they would make a change even then, let alone at the end of the season. But one of the little nuggets that were thrown into the very end of that report that no one really talked about, and obviously it became a moot point because he started playing 2 weeks later anyway, was there was an indication in that report that there was some frustration with Lamar Jackson's development. So it's kind of funny that was the narrative in Week 9, at least according to one account, whoever his source was at that point. And then, everything's hunky-dory, and Lamar Jackson's your guy, and John Harbaugh gets a vote of confidence 2 weeks before the season ends, before they were even in the playoffs. So, I don't know. There are a lot of moving parts here. To your point, there could be a lot of changes. It might not be that many. There may not be changes on the coaching staff at this point. I'm not going to expect that. A couple years ago, I expected them to move on from Marty Morningwig. It never happened. So you never expect it until it happens, but I'm with you from the standpoint of there could be some changes here. And from a player standpoint, there are going to be changes beyond just Joe Flacco. There are going to be other guys. I mean, Marshall Yanda admitted earlier this year he's on a year-to-year kind of basis now with his career and being in this league over a decade. Terrell Suggs wants to play next year. Do the Ravens want to have him back, and at what cost? Go down the list of guys like Eric Weddle, and what happens with Jimmy Smith and his cap figure next year. And there are just so many guys you can point to, and there's definitely a sense of this could be a very different team next year. And even if Lamar Jackson shows some very meaningful signs in his development, that still doesn't guarantee that they're going to be back in this position next year. This team could be a little bit closer to kind of that rebuild, reload territory than on the cusp of being a contender, unless Lamar Jackson blows up in his second year and all of a sudden becomes an above-average passer to go along with unparalleled mobility and speed at the quarterback position.
Well, that's going to have to happen if you're going to start talking about him being a Michael Vick kind of. Even Deshaun Watson running around losing a playoff game the other night. The running part of this and the seeking contact part of this is never going to be a great long-term play in my mind. It's never going to feel safe to me that you have a running back who wants to get tackled 12 to 15 times in this league in the middle of the field in a game, and you're going to go into every game doing that. And that's before he gets smushed 7 times and sacked. I mean, I was blown away by how much he got sacked and how the pressure he couldn't avoid the pressure. I thought getting sacked would be something we just would never see him get sacked like that you wouldn't be able to catch him like that. I thought that part of it was very telling on Sunday.
Yeah, and I think that to me, that part of it, a couple things. One, the Chargers do have 2 really good edge rushers. I mean, Joey Bosa and Melvin Ingram, that's a very, very good tandem. I mean, that's one of the better tandems in the NFL as far as 2 guys capable of wrecking the game from a pass rushing standpoint. But I do think, and this isn't unique to Lamar Jackson, and keep in mind, all the other first-time playoff quarterbacks in Wild Card Weekend. They lost. Deshaun Watson lost, and Mitch Trubisky lost.
Dude, when we're getting our ass kicked and I'm sitting there with you in the silence of the fourth quarter and it's 23-3, I'm thinking to myself, what kind of a dumbass am I? Yeah, I know they had purple helmets on and all. We're talking about a quarterback. Forget the names. You're talking about a decorated 16-year quarterback in the league who's never won a big game, who finally has a good team, playing in a playoff game against the youngest ever quarterback to have a playoff game, that whoever the younger quarterback is, even when it's Andrew Luck or Peyton Manning or Troy Aikman or Ben Roethlisberger, whoever it is, you never like the younger quarterback in a playoff game, ever, right? Like, that's the thing you always judge. We should have seen this coming. I mean, certainly people in Vegas did. You know what I mean? Like, we shouldn't be all that shocked, you know? So, right?
Yeah, but I mean, they were a favorite in Vegas, so you know they were 2.5 to 3 points. I mean, I'm not a gambler, but I do pay attention to the lines because I just think it's kind of interesting. But that's why, and I'll give you what my narrative would have been, or I guess arguing against the narrative. If the Ravens had won on Sunday, what would everyone have been saying? Oh, the Ravens go to Foxborough and play the Patriots tougher than anyone. And I would have said, you know what? The guy that beat the Patriots in Foxborough is standing on the sideline now as your backup quarterback. And I think they had, I want to say it was 12 or 13 players, maybe 14 players remaining from the 2014 team that, went there and, they played well, but they lost, right? And they haven't beat
you're going to tell me the youngest guy in the history of the league is going to go beat Tom Brady
I was
going to
tell you,
right?
I was going to tell you that it wasn't all Lamar Jackson either. I was going to say, this is a different team now. I mean, we need to let go. Honestly, the whole thing about no one wants to play the Ravens and they're battle-tested in the playoffs, they've won one playoff game in the last 6 years. One. They've been to the playoffs twice in the last 6 years. And look, full credit for winning the division and making the playoffs. But this isn't a team that has a January pedigree anymore. They just don't. Most of those guys, Ed Reed's getting ready to join Ray Lewis in the Hall of Fame. That's the last time this team really had a true defined playoff pedigree. And, there are a few guys left there, but you know what? Terrell Suggs is gray and old. Joe Flacco is going to be gone. So this is a new era of Ravens football. And, John Harbaugh has been to the playoffs 7 times and deserves a ton of credit for that. But this is a new era, and as far as a lot of these new guys getting their first taste of the playoffs on Sunday, it didn't go well, specifically on the offensive side of the ball, and that's something now that until they get their next opportunity and bounce back, that's going to be on their mind, and that's going to be part of the narrative for them. And, Lamar Jackson, the next time he's in the playoffs, if he's in the playoffs again, everyone's going to talk about how poorly he played against the Chargers in the same way that Joe Flacco.
Andy Dalton. Let's go with Andy Dalton, right? For forever, right?
Like I said, Joe Flacco, first couple years, the playoff numbers weren't pretty. They won games, but he wasn't a big reason why they were winning those games. What did he do? He changed the narrative, and eventually he became January Joe and became one of the all-time great playoff quarterbacks as far as the 2012 run. So you can change that and you can get better, but it didn't go well on Sunday, and they're further and further away from the team that was one of the class teams of the AFC for a long time, and they've just been okay since then. And now the challenge is going to be that they had this run, they made it, they fell way short in the wild card round playing at home, even though I know the score says they were, they lost by a touchdown. But the question will now be, how much better can you get? And the task now for Eric DeCosta and his staff is to build on what looks like a very promising 2018 draft. You need to build on that, and you need to hit some more home runs, and you need to get Lamar Jackson enough help. And the coaching staff, whoever it might be, whether it's the current one or whether it's a tweaked one or a completely different one, they need to develop Lamar Jackson, and they need to go to work because this team made a commitment to him when they drafted him in the first round last April. So they've got to go to work. And that's not to say they won't do it, and that's not to say that they won't have a championship-caliber roster in the next 2 to 3 years. But a lot of the players that they've leaned on for a long time are going to be gone or are just getting older, and you need more Matt Judons to step up. You need Patrick Owasso, someone who we haven't mentioned once. I thought he played a whale of a game on Sunday.
Absolutely.
Good to see that, because who knows what's going to happen with C.J. Mosley. So it's good to see some of these young players start to emerge, and we certainly saw that on the offensive side of the ball with Orlando Brown and Gus Edwards and the rookie tight ends, and of course Lamar Jackson. Performance Sunday notwithstanding, but you're going to need more of that, and those guys need to get better. And some young players who, quite frankly, haven't figured it out yet. Some of those guys need to figure it out, and you're going to have more cap flexibility. Now you're going to have some dead money this year with Joe Flacco, and perhaps if they make a couple other decisions with some other guys, there might be a little bit of dead money there, but you're going to have a quarterback on a rookie contract. Let's remember that. Let's remember the positive part of Lamar Jackson. And even though there are questions about his development, you're going to have a heck of a lot more cap flexibility, but you need to use that wisely. And philosophically, I've had let's just say I've had a difference of opinion of a lot of the decisions that the Ravens have made the last 5 or 6 years. And again, we'll see if they've learned their lesson. It was a fun season, and they won a division, and they had hosted a home playoff game, and even with the loss in mind, that's not something to take lightly, and the last 5 years should be a good reminder of that, considering it had been 6 years since a division title, but they can't rest on their laurels, and they've got a lot of work to do on a number of fronts to not just kind of build on what they did this year, but to kind of maintain this level. It's going to take a lot of work.
There are no buses to Foxborough. There are no flights to Kansas City. And Luke and I will be hosting other teams in Atlanta 3 weeks from now. We get together for Super Bowl 53. I think I'm doing the math on that. All of our WNST coverage brought to you by our friends, and this is a time of the year where you want to drink, right, and you want to eat. King Discount Liquors, Lottery Beer, Booze, and the best prices in Baltimore. I am out of Malbec. I am out of Lager. I am almost out of Stout, although I did drink a few over the weekend now that I'm feeling a little better. I'm going to get my razor blade out and shave. I'm going to drink. I'm going to eat. I'm going to go get crab cakes. I'm going to Essex. I'm going to visit Al's Seafood. I'm going to get some of those scallops and bring them home. I'm going to Pizza John's and getting a pizza. I'm getting a big fat cheesesteak with provolone on it and mushrooms and fried onions. I'm going to go to Costas and get crabs, big ones, big fat ones. I'm going to drink beer over there. I'm going to listen to jazz music. I'm going to visit with all my sponsors. I'm getting up the Box Hill. I'm out of dressing. I got to go see Tommy up there for that. So I got to do all of this before we go to Atlanta in a couple of weeks. Got all of our sponsors, big-time business this year. We've got a lot of things going on around here. We got rock and roll, the Modell Lyric. I got John Mellencamp coming to town. Hang in there, everybody. We're even going to play baseball here this year. That's not going to go well at all, but we're going to play baseball this year. Facebook Live and YouTube Live, we stream live. I'm out in the buyatoyota.com audio vault 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world on your mobile device by downloading the TuneIn radio app. We come in crystal clear from anywhere in the world. The morning newspaper ships to your email inbox each and every morning at 7 a.m. It's all brought to you by Planet Fitness. PlanetFitness.com, where it's always $5 down, $10 a month. Now that the Ravens are eliminated, get in the gym. Get yourself in the best shape of your life. Cold weather's here now, too. It's gotten a little colder since the Ravens lost. 29-degree mornings feel like 29-degree mornings. Instead of, hey, let's fire up the bus and go to Foxborough where it'll be 15. I'm a little bummed about this. It's going to be a rough week around here. We're going to have a lot of guests on. We're going to be discussing the future of John Harbaugh and Joe Flacco and Lamar Jackson and the Ravens and the playoffs themselves. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.